In the quiet suburbs of Colorado Springs, a horrific crime shattered the peace of a community and baffled investigators for years. A young woman, just starting her life, was found brutally murdered in her own home. The scene was chaotic, leaving few clues behind. The police were stumped, the family was devastated, and the killer, it seemed, had vanished into thin air. For over a decade, the case went cold. The files gathered dust, memories faded, and hope for justice dwindled. But one detective, haunted by the victim's face, refused to give up. He believed the killer was hiding in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing. This is the story of a crime that almost became a perfect mystery and the relentless pursuit of a truth that the court would eventually uncover. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of activity. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed friends, family, and anyone who knew the victim, Jacine Galinsky. She was a vibrant 21-year-old, known for her kindness and bright smile. Who would want to harm her? Her boyfriend at the time, Derek, was quickly ruled out. He had a solid alibi and was visibly distraught. Friends painted a picture of a happy young woman with no known enemies. The case was a blank wall. The only physical evidence was a small amount of foreign DNA found at the scene. But back in the late 1990s, DNA technology was still in its infancy. With no matches in the system and no other leads, the trail went cold. Jacine's family was left with a gaping hole in their lives and the agonizing question of who took their daughter and why. Years turned into a decade. Life moved on for everyone, except for those who couldn't forget Jacine. Detective Lou Brent, who was one of the first officers on the scene, kept the case file on his desk. It was a constant reminder of a promise he had made to himself and to Jacine's family. He would find her killer. He'd periodically reopen the file, rereading witness statements, looking at the crime scene photos, hoping for a fresh perspective, a missed detail. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. The community had largely forgotten, but for Detective Brent, the case was as fresh as the day it happened. He knew that somewhere out there, the person responsible was living a normal life, perhaps with a family, a job, completely unaware that the ghost of their past was about to catch up with them. Then, a breakthrough. Advancements in DNA technology had been exponential. The tiny, once-own usable sample collected from the scene could now be reanalyzed with much greater precision. Detective Brent saw his chance. He submitted the evidence to the crime lab, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and anxiety. This was it. This could be the key that unlocked the entire mystery. The lab ran the sample through the National DNA Database, CODIS. Days felt like weeks as Brent waited for the results. And then the call came. "We have a hit." The words sent a jolt through him. After more than 10 years of silence, they finally had a name. The DNA belonged to a man named Gerald, a local resident who had a minor criminal record from years ago, but had since lived a seemingly quiet life. Who was Gerald? On the surface, he was an ordinary guy. He was married, had kids, and worked a steady job. He was a neighbor, a person you'd see at the grocery store and never think twice about. But his DNA told a different story, placed him squarely at the scene of a brutal murder. When detectives brought him in for questioning, he was calm, almost dismissive. He denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Jacine, had never been to her apartment, and had no idea why his DNA would be there. He was a convincing liar. He played the part of the wrongly accused man perfectly, expressing shock and outrage that he was even being considered a suspect. He told the police they had the wrong guy, that it was a mistake, a lab error. He was so confident, so composed, that for a moment, even the seasoned detectives wondered if it was possible. But the DNA was irrefutable. The prosecution moved forward, and the case went to trial. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Jacine's family, their faces etched with years of pain, hoping for closure. On the other, Gerald, looking clean-cut and respectable, surrounded by his own supportive family, who couldn't believe he was capable of such a thing. The defense's strategy was simple: attack the evidence. They argued that the DNA sample was minuscule, that it could have been contaminated over the decade it sat in storage. They tried to create doubt, suggesting the DNA could have been transferred innocently, perhaps from a shared public space. They painted Gerald as a family man, a victim of a flawed system desperate to close a cold case. They were good. They planted seeds of doubt in the jurors' minds. The prosecution's case, while built on the powerful DNA evidence, seemed to be on shaky ground. The turning point came from an unexpected source. The prosecution called a specialist in touch DNA to the stand. This expert explained to the jury how our skin cells are constantly shedding. Every time we touch something, we leave behind a unique genetic signature. The expert then detailed where exactly the killer's DNA was found on Jacine's body. It wasn't just a random speck. It was found under her fingernails. The expert explained that this type of DNA transfer is almost always the result of a violent struggle. It meant that in her final moments, Jacine fought back. She had scratched her attacker, collecting his skin cells under her nails, leaving behind the very evidence that would one day identify him. It was a posthumous testimony from Jacine herself, a silent accusation from the grave. You could feel the shift in the courtroom. The image of a desperate fight for life was powerful and deeply unsettling. The prosecution then laid out its theory. Gerald, who lived nearby, had likely seen Jacine and targeted her. He had broken into her apartment with violent intentions. The crime wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a planned attack. When Jacine fought back, she unknowingly sealed his fate. The defense's arguments about contamination or innocent transfer suddenly seemed weak and improbable. How could his DNA have innocently gotten under her fingernails during a violent struggle? Gerald's calm and collected demeanor in court now looked less like innocence and more like the cold, calculated mask of a predator. His story that he had never met her, never been near her, was completely shattered by the silent testimony of the DNA she had clawed from his skin. The jury listened intently, their faces grim. The pieces were all falling into place. The final nail in the coffin was Gerald's own testimony. Against his lawyer's advice, he took the stand. He wanted to look the jury in the eye and convince them of his innocence. It was a colossal mistake. Under the prosecutor's relentless cross-examination, his cool facade began to crack. He couldn't explain his whereabouts on the night of the murder. His answers became evasive, contradictory. He stumbled over his words, his confident act crumbling into a desperate, unconvincing performance. The jury saw right through it. They saw not a victim of circumstance, but a guilty man trying to lie his way out of a crime he thought he had gotten away with. His arrogance was his undoing. He believed he was smarter than everyone in the room, but in the end, he only succeeded in convicting himself. After a tense trial, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Jacine's family sobbed, a release of more than a decade of grief and uncertainty. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. Gerald was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He had lived freely for 13 years, building a new life while a family mourned. He thought he had committed the perfect crime, that he had left no trace. But he was wrong. He left behind the one thing he couldn't erase, his own DNA, captured by his victim in her final act of defiance. It's a powerful reminder that even when it seems like all hope is lost, the truth has a way of coming to light. And sometimes, the most crucial evidence comes from the victim themselves. A final, silent cry for justice that echoes through time until it is finally heard. Thanks for watching, and if you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. See you next time.